novels reading in this modern day and age? What are you, a loser with nothing else better to do with your time? Well, yes, I am the loser with nothing else better to do with my time. Well, anyways, who cares, right? It's 2024. Anybody can do what they want with their time. Anyways, Lord of the Mysteries. What is that? It's a web novel. Well, web novels are exactly what you think they are. They're just novels that are published across different websites, online, hence the name, web novels. Simple enough, right? Well, there are some bit more caveats to it, like some significant difference between it and classical literature, like I'm thinking classical fiction like Dune or whatever. But let's just move along with that for now, okay? Now, why Lord of the Mysteries? Why is it special? Well, if you want to get into web novels, you would go across these different websites and look at, I don't know, popularity rankings, top charts, recommendation lists to look up your next thing to read. Across these different charts, across these different lists and popularity rankings, one title will keep on popping up. Lord of the Mysteries. It is hailed by the people that love them as one of the peak fiction out there that you can readily read right now. Now, is that true? Well, as things often are, especially by the people that love them, things tends to be overblown by quite a bit, right? People would just claim whatever as to be really good if they love the piece of media that they love. So things have to be taken with some grain of salt. Anyways, before we actually start to discuss this with any grains of depth, I think it's somewhat important to understand this story by a little bit. Now, this story ultimately covers the person Cho Ming-ri, an Earthen citizen, if you will, who got transmigrated into parallel Earth. Now, this parallel Earth has the setting of a Victorian era. Victorian era, think like Bloodborne, let's say. On top of being in the Victorian era, this world also covers fantasy powers. Think like magical powers. Now, it's not those boring ass magical powers, things like shooting fireball, controlling water, or controlling thunder, or I don't know, earthbending and etc. It's not those boring powers, and it's much more creative in their approach to their magical powers. But let's just move along with that for now. Those two things are already enough to make this world somewhat interesting to get into, right? On top of those two, this world, this parallel Earth, also covers the story of grounded gods. Now, I have to admit, this has definitely led to a lot of bias on my part because I absolutely adore the ideas and stories that covers grounded gods. But what are grounded gods? Well, that's a term I just fucking made up. I don't know if that term actually exists, but here's what I think by grounded gods. They are these beings who are just that much more, maybe they're much more powerful, much more knowledgeable, much more wisdomful than the normal beings that live within their realm. Hence, they are considered to live in the different planes of existence, like a different dimensional of being. Hence, they are considered deities, gods, hence the term grounded gods. Now, they're a stark contrast to the omnipotent, omniscient gods, like think Christian God or maybe the Muslim Allah. No, they're much more grounded than those gods. Now, ultimately, what does it take for something to be considered peak fiction? Well, baseline, I think it's fair to say that they at least have to have a very good writing. Writing that is good enough that there are some glaring issues that cause the whole fiction to be ruined just based on their writing in the first place. Here's the interesting part about that aspect. I said web novels has some significant difference with classical literature, right? Well, that's ultimately because of their approach to their audience. Web novels typically approach to their audience to create a more of a casual read experience. That means lower quality of writing that is just that much easier to get into. Stories that covers more action-packed stories maybe, or more romance or more tragedy that makes it easier to get into. Stark contrast to the classical literature. If you have read any classical books, I think you would agree with me that they are typically not that easy to get into. They are not just something that you would casually read as you're going home from work unless you're a fucking weirdo. Sorry about that. Unless you're already very much used to it. But that means Lord of the Mysteries inherently has to have much lower quality of writing, right? How can it be classified as peak fiction? Well, here's the interesting thing. As you read Lord of the Mysteries, it will become very evident that the writing style is more of a classical literature than it is web novel. The writing quality is much better than the typical web novels out there. Okay, like seriously, the author actually created a whole fairy tale inside the novel. Now, I don't know how impressive that is in the world of classical literature, but that's most certainly impressive in the world of web novels. You would be surprised. It's even good enough that you can even just enjoy it in isolation. Try reading it. If anything, it's at least a proof of quality. Although, do be careful, it does include some minor spoilers, so if you really care about those, do avoid it and don't try to do that. Now that's a good thing and a bad thing. It's good because it guarantees a certain level of quality in their writing. That means you can just get engaged into the story just purely based on the writing. But that's a bad thing because people who are gonna read Lord of the Mysteries are people who are gonna read and look forward to a good web novel, not a classical book, which is very evident as you get into the comment section across different Lord of the Mysteries sites. A lot of people will be complaining that I'm trying to read Lord of the Mysteries because people say it's the best web novel out there, but why is it so slow though? Which is very interesting, and believe it or not, one of its most glaring issues that Lord of the Mysteries ultimately have. Now, the other interesting point about this part, as you look at those comment section of non-believers, let's say, a lot of people will try their best to convince them to stay at least until the 80 to 100 chapter. That's because, by that point, that's when Lord of the Mysteries starts assuming its identity as a web novel. It starts picking up its pace. That's the first point of Cho Ming-ri, who by this point have somewhat blah. Okay, as I was editing this, I actually realized that I was getting into spoiler territory a bit too much. So let's try and simplify it. That's basically the first time we get introduced to a really hype fight sequence. One that is exploring those powers that I kept on telling you are very unique and interesting. If turning non-believers into believers is not enough of a proof of how good the sequences are, then just believe in my hype, alright, that's it. But ultimately what made this fight sequence also very much hype is the main character. You would fall in love to Cho Ming-ri, who by this point has acclimated to his new identity as Clayne Moretti so much just from this fight because he is that ingenious in his approach to fighting, which is somewhat you can attribute it to just the powers themselves, but ultimately it is the main character who managed to create these different plans and schemes just to get ahead from his foes. On top of just Clayne Moretti, this world introduces a lot of different side characters as well. Now, what does it mean for a character to be great? For me, for a character to be great, it has to have a certain level of depth to it. It has to have their own history, their own emotion. They don't feel like just these plot devices to move the story along. Now that's something that Lord of the Mysteries definitely do well. Not perfectly, there are definitely still some parts, some characters that feel somewhat lacking, but overall, especially on those side characters and the main character that really mattered a lot, it is very much well thought out. There's a lot of character developments that feels very natural and good, and the main character as well, as I've said, is very much likable and lovable. The characters that were first introduced in the first 80 chapter will last you until like, I don't know, the 1300 chapters that Lord of the Mysteries ultimately have. That's just how good each characters are well thought out in. Ultimately though, I have to admit, for me, the main meat of what makes this story that much more than usual is the story. Is the world. The world is just that much interesting for me. What makes the world so good? For me, I think the world has to have their own history. It must feel like the world doesn't just revolve around its readers. The world wouldn't just start moving because of its readers. It has to have their own world. After all, it's a world. Why makes you think that the world just moves around based on from one person, 10 person, 100 different person? It should have their own world that revolves around its own rule. This world doesn't really follow that to a T. It definitely still revolves very much to the main character, and possibly that's because of the limitations of a book. Probably to make a book really interesting, or a story, any kind of story interesting, it will still just ultimately revolve around its reader. But at the very least, the world itself is very much well thought out. And also, I'm kind of contentious in this point, like mysteries. The mysteries are very good, but what they consider to be mysteries is, to me, quite contentious. To me, the mysteries are simply world building. Like, Cho Ming-ri got transmigrated into a parallel Earth. There's a lot of things he doesn't understand, and these things that he doesn't understand about this new world is what is considered mysteries. To me, that's just world building. Well, whatever you consider it, that part is good. The way they drip out, like slowly drip down the world and pieces of the world and how it works and the different powers, different, like, I don't know, organizations that exist in the world, that's very good. The author is very smart in the way they approach this kind of stuff. It makes you feel intrigued toward this story and doesn't bore you down. It keeps you entertained but doesn't frustrate you overtly. Well, I've said a lot of good things about Lord of the Mysteries, so it has to be perfect then, right? Well, no, obviously not. Nothing is perfect. Even Lord of the Mysteries has a lot of problems to it. The major problem is ultimately just the first 80 chapter, but just trust me, alright? Just trust me, just read it. It will be worth it by you get to the 80 to 100 chapter, because it will make it hype, okay? Yeah, it's kind of slow with slice of life by the first 80 chapter, but again, as I've told you, the writing quality of Lord of the Mysteries is pretty superb, which means these slower first few chapters are still going to be pretty good. It is ultimately still understandable that the problems that came out of these first few chapters is probably due to the dissonance of the expectations of the readers coming into Lord of the Mysteries, expecting high energy content that is similar to other web novels, but getting slapped in the face with some slice of life instead, which, as you might have guessed, is a disappointment to a lot of people out there. Well, whatever. The ultimate question, is it the peak of web fiction? No, obviously not. Can anybody even say what the peak of web fiction are? Well, what it ultimately is though, a peak of web fiction. It is definitely one of the best pieces of media you can readily enjoy right now. So just go and read it. What else are you gonna do anyway? Watch more YouTube? Watch more TikTok? Come on, mix it up a little bit. Go read some web novels. So the next time someone like, yo, what are you up to? I'm reading. Well, anyways, that's it. Thank you so much for watching. Bye bye. I hope you have a great rest of your day.